Welcome to Fail Focus, the series where we take real Part 3 tests that have sadly been unsuccessful, and we study and analyze and dissect exactly what's gone on in the hope that we can help everybody understand what didn't quite work and what we can do next time to give ourselves the best odds. Today we're looking at William's Part 3 test. This is a first attempt, and the focus of this lesson was to work on hesitation at roundabouts. The examiner acknowledged a long list of faults, and at first glance it looks like the lesson has been peppered with all sorts of different faults. But on closer examination, we can actually see that there is a lot of connections between the faults that are on this list. And so that gives us hope, William. That gives us hope that actually the lesson wasn't so jam-packed of different types of faults. It's full of plenty of the same kinds of faults, and I'm going to tell you what I mean by that later in the video. So the plan was hesitation at roundabouts, and the examiner has listed a lot of faults, and I'll come to the examiner's comments in a moment, but the examiner has listed a lot of faults in this lesson as the main reasons why it's been an unsuccessful Part 3 attempt. The examiner listed positioning on right-hand bends, unclear or incorrect speed choices, approaching too fast or too slow, depending on the environment, missed mirror checks, late reactions to blockers, harsh braking, and poor lane discipline at roundabouts as a whole. Sounds like there's a lot going on there. But if you allow me to, I'm going to explain how a lot of these faults are connected to the same selection of a couple of different skills. On paper, this lesson looks like it's been a complete breakdown, but as we'll see, it's not as overwhelming as I think it appears. So here's what the examiner had to say. The lesson theme was hesitation at roundabouts. During the drive, the PDI identified a number of mistakes in the pupil's drive. This included position on right bends, driving at an appropriate speed, knowing the speed limit of the road, mirror checks, unnecessarily harsh braking, late reaction to blockers, and lane discipline on roundabouts. Insufficient Q&A to analyze or remedy these faults resulted in limited learning taking place. The pupil approached some roundabouts too fast, which the PDI did not appear to identify. The Q&A used did not go far enough to develop the pupil's knowledge and understanding. The pupil was late reacting to some hazards on the road. However, opportunities to use Q&A to develop awareness and planning weren't taken. The PDI was professional and friendly throughout the session. Let's look at the scores first of all, because I know that for some of you it's important to try and understand the 17 competencies better so that you can suitably work on those skills yourself. For those of you who don't know, the 17 competencies are broken down into 3 categories. That is lesson planning, risk management, and teaching and learning strategies. William, of the 4 competencies within lesson planning, we've scored a 1 on 3 out of 4 of them. Those competencies are identifying learning goals and needs, using an appropriate lesson structure, and adapting the plan when appropriate. I hope that it seems clear to all of you guys that if the examiner has felt that William unfortunately has missed some faults in the pupil's approach speed and their responsiveness to certain situations, it's going to be difficult for the examiner not to give a 1 here, because the examiner is asking themselves, did the PDI consistently and regularly identify learning goals and needs? Well, the learning goals and needs are based on the faults that we're seeing. And if we're not seeing faults, we haven't been able to identify the learning goals and needs. And if we're unable to identify learning goals and needs, how can we pick a structure that's appropriate for that lesson? Equally, if we can't identify learning goals and needs, and we can't pick an appropriate structure, then how are we ever going to possibly hope to adapt the lesson if we're not even identifying all of those faults? Now, William, under risk management, you've actually scored comparatively quite well as opposed to the competencies within teaching and learning strategies and lesson planning. So this gives us a clear sense that you are keeping the lesson fundamentally safe for the most part, and I want you to keep aspiring to do that. Teaching and learning strategies, we've scored 1 on 5 of the competencies, and some of those competencies refer to our ability to encourage the pupil to reflect on their own performance. It's going to be difficult for us to reflect accurately on the performance of the lesson if we're not identifying all the faults and or fixing those faults and making them go away. Equally, if we're not clarifying learning outcomes, that means we're not taking real situations that have occurred and using them to clarify learning outcomes. And that can work in both directions. When something goes really well, you want to clarify, that's why we do it this way, that's how it's supposed to be done, how do we achieve that? But the opposite is also true. When something has gone poorly or has the potential to have, we're going to clarify, that's why it needs to be this way. That's why we practice in the way we do. We've scored 1 in that section because we're just not doing enough. We're not going deep enough with our questions and our coaching, as the examiner has said. So I think that kind of makes the point. You can see how if we don't get off to a good start with those first few competencies, it has knock-on effects to the other competencies. If we cannot show evidence that we can identify our pupils' learning goals and needs, and that is choosing the appropriate lesson to focus on, but being willing to adapt the focus of that lesson where necessary, and also identifying faults when they're happening, all of that kind of stuff refers to identifying our pupils' learning goals and needs. Failure to really nail that is going to show problems later down the line when the examiner gets to the later competencies. So what are my top points on this video? Well, let me start by saying that it looks like there's a lot of different faults here. I actually think, as I'm going to make in my next point, I don't think it's as bad as that list suggests, but there are a list of faults here. And when you've got faults peppered throughout your lesson, especially with a 45-minute window, that's not a big window. So when the lesson feels like you've got faults peppered all around, that tells me that overall, this lesson, this pupil and their needs are not being met. Either the lesson plan was too challenging, that could be the environment or the focus, the subject, or the level of instruction wasn't meeting the pupil's needs. They either needed to be in an environment that was more manageable, or they needed to get extra support from you. And one of those two things, if not both, hasn't happened. When you have lots of different faults peppered throughout a period of time, overall, the evidence is there that they are not getting the support they need and they are struggling to cope with that lesson. So what we need to do in those moments is say, tell you what, this isn't going to plan. Let's just reevaluate, regain control. Either we'll go somewhere more manageable, or we'll change the focus so that it's more accomplishable, or I'm going to provide extra support on this and this and this so that you can focus on that and you're not so overwhelmed. Overall, if your lesson is littered with different faults everywhere within a short condensed amount of time, that lesson is failing to meet the pupil's current needs. You need to change something, either your level of support or the environment or the focus, so that the pupil can perform at whatever level they can cope with in that moment. So whatever the faults are, I don't really care too much about what the faults are, but if there's a lot of them in a condensed period of time, that's your evidence, that's your alarm bell to think, let's get control of this, let's resettle, let's reevaluate, and let's just try and take something from this lesson that's going to be really helpful, even if it's just one thing. Now, the second thing that I want to highlight about the faults that the examiner has listed is, as I said, it looks like a long list of faults. But actually, I think these faults are connected. And I want to just change the way you think about faults for a second so that you can see this the way I see it. And hopefully this will help you respond to faults in a different way. When I look at faults, I'm not necessarily looking at them always as separate entities. So a pupil who fails to respond to traffic lights when they change is showing me a certain type of fault. And then a pupil who fails to check their blind spot when they move off, that looks like a totally different type of fault. But they are both awareness faults. If you have watched my content before, you know I talk a lot about we teach skills, not subjects. The subject is the context for which we will facilitate development of skills. The subject is just a different environment that will allow us to really build the skills. So the pupil that doesn't check the blind spot and the pupil who doesn't see that the lights have gone from green to red or red to green, they are both awareness faults in different environments, but they're awareness faults. So now I'm going to be looking at that pupil in that moment saying, we need some exercises that are going to develop some awareness here. Whereas other instructors who are focused on subjects, they're going to be thinking, Okay, I need to go back and do moving off and stopping, and then I need to go and do traffic lights and pedestrian crossings. Can you see how we've responded to those faults totally differently? Only my way allows me to take a couple of faults and come up with one fix overall. So I think that the faults listed in the examiner's feedback speak to the same 2 or 3 skills. Let's look at them. Positioning on right-hand bends. That's awareness, maybe a bit of planning. Driving at an appropriate speed or knowing the speed limit, well, that's definitely awareness and a bit of planning, probably. Mirror checks are being missed. Well, that's awareness, maybe even some planning. Unnecessarily harsh braking. That's almost definitely connected to planning and awareness to some degree, and also maybe a little bit of car control. But actually, I think the origin of that problem is going to be a lack of awareness and a lack of planning, and then it manifests into a car control issue. Late reaction to blockers. Again, awareness, the inability to read that situation, and maybe a little bit of anticipation, but an inability to read that situation and be aware of your surroundings and plan for it, and then a little bit of car control again. So we're seeing a theme here. It's awareness, it's planning, and it's a bit of car control. But this is a lesson that has been littered with different types of faults, only these faults all speak to the same couple of skills. If that were me, I'm going to be working on trying to really bring up my pupils' awareness of what's going on around them and their planning for the environment around them. And if I can do those 2 things really early, I'm going to bring this in really, really early and try and get the pupil planning ahead, forward planning, and preparing for the things that they're now aware of, planning and awareness. A lot of these faults will go away or at least get better. So what I want you to start thinking, William, is which skill do these faults connect to? Because if you can start to see faults attached to skills, the way you respond to them will be different. Lastly, the examiner has highlighted, William, that there is a bit of an issue where Q&A isn't going deep enough. We're not really producing thought. We're not really facilitating learning. We're not really getting to the root cause. It sounds to me like a little bit of work on your Q&A to really get to the bottom of problems will make a big difference for you. Now, there's different types of questions. There are proactive questions that you want to do where you want to push thought before an event happens. And there's reflective questions where you want to get the pupil to analyze and think about something that has already happened and reflect on how it could have been different. I've said many times I could write a course on questioning, and in fact, we've done that. I am going to pop a link into the description for our mini course on questioning. It's called 14 Days to Wake Up Your Questions. If you are somebody who is struggling to go deeper with your questions, this has to be the first place you start. It was written and produced by the amazing Lou Walsh, and I cannot recommend it enough. But for now, what I will say, William, is it sounds to me like this lesson was overwhelming, stressful, and as a result, there were faults littered and peppered throughout the session. When that happens, let's take stock of the situation. Let's regain control. Let's change the environment or change the level of support so that the pupil is not struggling so much. We'll make those faults go away because we'll now meet their current needs. And we can look at those faults that we've got and say, right, let's list the faults. We've got 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 faults. Which skill do they speak to? Is it car control, awareness, anticipation, planning, or judgment? Those are the 5 skills. Which skill do these faults speak to? And identify if there are any repeat occurrences. So it might be that you think, well, that's a bit of car control and there's a bit of judgment in there, but these 3 or 4, that's awareness. That's how you target what you're going to work on first. It's the one that comes up most often. Which faults are coming up in relation to which skills? Then once you've got that far, we need to work on your Q&A to go deeper, to go further, to produce learning. I'm going to leave a link in the description as to where you can go, because I really, really, really believe that that mini course alone will transform your Q&A tenfold. William, thank you so much for sharing your experience with me, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of that journey. I hope that this has been helpful to you primarily, and for everyone else watching, I hope that this has been helpful to you as well. Let me ask a couple of really quick favors from you all, please. We are pushing on for 1,000 subscribers before Christmas. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate that. It helps me help other people. If you haven't already, give this video a like. I'm aiming for 50 likes for this video. If you can get to 50 likes for this video, that'd mean the world to me. And lastly, share this video far and wide, and we're going to help as many people as we can. And if you want to, put a comment in the comment section. I always respond. I always read. And if you need anything, that's the best place to get me. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.